Okay. Welcome to our second seminar in our seminar series, Space Economy. And thanks for coming, everyone, on, at this hour on Saturday with the traffic because of the football game and all, despite all. I'm very happy to very quickly introduce ELKE KRASNY, who's going to talk today. The talk is titled Hands-on Urbanism, the Right to Green. ELKE and I met, I remember the date very well because that was my last chance to come to be here for Gezi, and I couldn't because of that conference. We met in Basel. We were attending a conference on migration, both of us. And the 15th and 16th of June 2013. And then we really had very nice conversations and spent nice time together. And then we kind of like met again afterwards, but I'm really happy to have ELKE here. She's a scholar, she's a curator, so she's really like a multi-talented one of those people who does a lot of different things. And she's a professor at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. And this project, as far as I remember, was also published in the form of a book, and that was also an exhibition. So ELKE is today going to talk about different case studies, I guess, she has. Yeah, I just
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to thank both of you for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to speak about a project that is not a new project. It was a project on which I started to do research a long time ago, and I will explain a little more why I started researching. I want to say good afternoon to everyone. It's sunshine, and I just learned there is football, so the competition couldn't be higher. So I'm really happy that you came to join us here. When Deria and I met at this conference, the reason why I actually approached her was a sentence she said from the audience in a very firm voice. So she said, everyone is a migrant. Maybe we can come back to that with regard to what hands-on urbanism and people who take the making of their cities into their own hands have to do with each other. So even though today's talk is not focusing on migration, many of the people who practice hands-on urbanism are people who have migrated to other cities or have migrated like rural to urban migration or more global transnational migration. So this is something we may want to keep in mind. And so just by way of introduction, because this is what really impressed me when you said that. I would like to begin with the title, and then I will tell you a little bit about why I started to do this kind of research that has to do with urban gardening and urban farming, but maybe tries to look at something that is broader than quote-unquote just urban gardening. Hands-on, as you all know, means something you do with your hands very directly. No? It has the kind of physical and material doing inscribed into the word. But I'm not a native speaker, so I always like to look at words. What else do they mean? I mean, what other kind of meaning is embedded in these terms? And hands-on also means involving active participation. And participation has been discussed in politics, in policy, in urban governance, by activists as a fraught territory, you could say, or a contested territory. And so we could also understand hands-on in a very political way. involving active and maybe uninvited participation. And hands-on also means applied, maybe not necessarily as opposed to theoretical, but something that has to do with practice. And urbanism, so I'm doing the same thing with urbanism, not to bore you, but to let you understand that I try to encapsulate a number of different things with this title of an exhibition. Urbanism means urbanization. So the process is when something rural is turned into urban. That's how urbanization is very often defined. Something that used to be non-urban then becomes urban. But it also means the growth of cities, as if this growth were something organic. So I'm always kind of wondering about growth, because of course growth is not something that just happens, but there are many different actors involved in the growing of cities. Urbanism also means the culture or the way of life of city dwellers. So I would like to argue that there is a specific way in which city dwellers are actually part of urbanization. They make cities or they grow cities, maybe not always in the foreseen ways, in unexpected ways, but they also produce by doing so a specific way of life, which we might call urban. And then the third element of urbanism, or the third definition that is still missing, is the theory of city planning. And by way of looking at what is very often also referred to as bottom-up processes of urbanization or irregular urbanization, it, I think, is also clear that theories of city planning have to become more encompassing than just looking at planning from a perspective of the planned. So how to integrate or how to understand the complexities between the planned and the unplanned on many levels. And I'm not arguing one is good and the other is bad, so this is not an ethical argument, but it's an argument about that both the planning and the unplanning produce urbanization and are part of what we call urbanism. I started doing this research many years ago by now. So it was the year of the financial / economic crisis, 2007-2008. And I actually did research for another exhibition at the time. So I was researching for an exhibition that dealt with the tools of architecture. So a very different field that was scheduled to open in 2008. And for this exhibition, I had the opportunity to travel a lot. So the Architecture Center in Vienna bought me a ticket around the globe to do research. And while I was traveling and I had this opportunity to see a lot of different cities around the world, everywhere I went, I saw this so-called new phenomenon of growing food and vegetables in the urban context. And I kept asking myself, why now? I mean, why is this so important in the year of the financial crisis? Is there a correlation to be made or an argument to be constructed? And it is from this lens, you could say, of crisis, or with crisis in mind, that I started to do research both historically and contemporary research, so a lot of archival research and field work, and it took, so I'm a slow curator, so it took a number of years, and then I presented this exhibition in 2012. This is also apparent in the title, so Hands-on Urbanism 1850 to 2012, and this means the period of time that was covered via case studies in this exhibition, first shown at the Architecture Center Vienna, where I live. And I would like to unfold a little bit the image we are looking at together. I will come back to this as a case study, but I want to say something about the chronopolitical dimension of the image. So chronopolitical has to do with the politics of time, and also what I have introduced already, that urbanization is defined as a move from the rural to the urban. And this is what I would like to challenge in today's understanding of what the urban can be. So if we look at this image together, it was taken in 2011 in the New Territories in Hong Kong. So we see these high-rise apartment buildings in the background of the image. And I think if we talk with people about such an image, most of them would maybe say, okay, this is what the future looks like, or this is what the present looks like. So the high-rise buildings are what our cities will look like in the future. Whereas what we see in the foreground, so the urban farming where a lot of cabbage is being grown, and the informal settlement that already came into being under the colonial British Empire regime in the New Territories in Hong Kong would probably be considered a thing of the past, or something that has to be done away with in order to make the city more urban. And what I would like to suggest is that with these growing movements of urban farming and urban gardening, we may come to a point where these two become equals in time. So no longer one is the old and the other one is the new, and one has to vanish because the other one will come. But there is a territory, a contested territory in these temporalities, where maybe future cities will look more like this, where there is a coexistence of that. I mean, nobody knows the future, but this is something that might happen if the energy that goes towards keeping urban farming and urban gardening, or even introducing new such kinds of activities, will play out the way this image suggests. And as I said before, it was an exhibition. So of course curators do a lot of research, but I would also like to say, when you curate or when you do research for exhibitions, it's not like doing research for an article, because you're in images, you have to deal with images, objects, so it's maybe also, I mean, that's a difficult thing to say, but on some level it's maybe less argumentative than a scholarly argument, and also some of the choices might be more intuitive. So maybe that's something to be debated, but I just wanted to make clear I worked here as a curator and not so much as a scholar, as you also introduced me before. This was what the exhibition looked like in the Architecture Center in Vienna. And you can see here from the image that for the display, we actually used these construction site fences. So they, in a way you could say, embody urban transformationality. So people relate easily to a construction site fence as something where construction is going on. But we also wanted to use the construction site fence as something that refers to the struggles, or the way in which urban gardeners have to fight against these construction site fences. And in the thinking of curators or scenographers, the construction site fences were originals, because we borrowed them from a developer and then they were given back. So they are not a museum object, but they are, if you will, a real object, if that is a distinction that is a viable one. And we worked with 600 different plants. So the plants came from community gardeners, from the official city gardeners in Vienna, and also from a company who lends plants to people who are in the film business. So I didn't even know such a business exists. So there are people who grow plants in order to be used for filmmaking. So these three different sources were So you could say there was an activist, if you will, source for landing these flowers and the edible plants that we had in the exhibition. And there was the official city garden, and then there was this woman growing plants as a business. So maybe this was to show plants are not one thing. They come from many different sources, and they had to be taken care of. So because if you have plants in an exhibition, all of a sudden they need to be watered and they need to be taken care of. So they come as this unruly element that is actually not being planned for. And there was, so this is a minor thing, but tomorrow is May 1st, so I will talk about this very briefly. There was a huge discussion with the Architecture Center staff, and I work as an independent curator, whether watering the plants was something you do in your lunch break or something you do during your work hours. And I think this is a very interesting to take this to both making the cities, making a city with your own hands, and also community gardening, which is very often unpaid labor or work that is not waged labor. So this is a very small detail, but I think it links to something that is a lot larger question. And now I'm finally coming to what was actually exhibited. So we exhibited 20 case studies from the global north and the global south, and mostly images, interviews, and a lot of text. So actually what is considered unsexy in exhibition making, thinking. And so the one thing I'm really happy with is that it worked. I mean, that there was an audience that kind of embraced to spend time there or to invest time there and to read and to engage with the information that was provided. And the exhibition is still traveling, so it's not over yet. So even though it was first shown in 2012, it just closed in Brno last month, and I had a request to show it somewhere in Germany next year, October. This is what it looked like in Leipzig. So just to give you a little bit of an impression what it was like in appealing to a public. And now I did this exercise of, so when you're in the research, sometimes you don't know yet where the research will take you. But I think sometimes the research then requires you to also find a terminology for it, or to understand how it may be linked to certain theoretical debates that are going on at the moment. And I think I just tried to do some stock taking here. What are the kinds of larger questions, contemporary questions that are of importance to understand what this hands-on urbanism has to do with? So I think very often not only capitalism is understood as a system of crisis, but also the processes of urbanization are understood as a sequence of crisis with not crisis in between. I mean, it's something we can discuss afterwards, but this is something from the research that I came to understand as such, and also what it means that urban dwellers or people who arrive in the city who did not live there before actually counteract crisis or take it into their own hands to produce what is not there, be it housing or be it subsistence gardening. Precariousness and precarization is very much debated currently. So this is not a historical term, but I think it's a term that we can use also to understand historic conditions. And I would like to quote here from a book by Isabelle Lorey, Lorey, and the book has the title State of Insecurity. And Judith Butler wrote an introduction to this book. And in this introduction, she writes, new governmental forms engaged in the precarization of population work precisely through cultivating forms of subjectivation and political agency that can and must be undone. So what she says here is that there is a new form of governmentality today that actively engages in the precarization of populations or of urban populations, and that the activism of the ones who are precarious, and that's what she suggests here, can actually undo this kind of process of precarization. So that's a very hopeful claim to make. But I would say that this is something we might also want to discuss together. And even though Lorey very much focuses on bodies, I think it's also important to understand that these processes of structural precarization that political and economic theory deals with extends to labor and to space. So how is the physical space where something can be built or can be grown, how is this precarized, taken out of the use that was there before in order to increase the extraction of value that can be extracted from all these things, bodies, labor, and space. Self-organization relates a lot to what I said before about hands-on, so that I would argue that the hands-on activities of gardening and of building very often lead to forms of self-organization, to a politics of self-organization, if one will. And many of these urban gardens, urban farms, or self-help building have taken on the form of associations. Be it in the global south or in the global north, the legal form that is chosen is very, very often the association that comes out of these processes of self-organization. So we could say there are processes of urbanization that are based on the legal form of the association. Austerity urbanism is a very recent term that was introduced to speak about saving. So when urban governments and national governments start to save money, and how this relates very much to neoliberal governmentality is something that then makes space and bodies and labor more precarious. And uneven development is equally a terminology that is used by Marxist geographers and urban sociologists to understand that not only is there uneven development in terms of what has been referred to as 1% versus the 99% in the global population with access to money, or the way wealth is distributed, but there's also very much an uneven development when it comes to urban space. So there has been a lot of research on where do the 1% own apartments around the world. So we can see that cities are actively transformed by the influx of capital. And that also means that the space that is there for the other 99% becomes more complex. So uneven development is something that looks at how space is distributed or redistributed unevenly. And this links to the term of spatial justice that is a concept used by scholars, activists, maybe what we might call activist scholars. Support and interdependence is very much, again, Judith Butler terminology. She wrote a text immediately after the Arab Spring in 2011 about the politics of the street, in which she says that all human action is always supported action. And she doesn't only speak about support in the sense that other humans support other humans, but that there is a physical or infrastructural support structure. So we could say, we could say that I'm sitting is supported by this chair. So she makes a claim that spaces have to be there to support human actions, and that there is an element not only of independence, which she also refers to in this Isabel Lorai book as something that is a more masculinist concept, but of the interdependence between bodies and material space and infrastructures. And so then we see that support and interdependence become very political questions with regard to access to space and distribution and redistribution. So I'm sorry that this is becoming more theoretical at the beginning, but it will become more case study oriented as I go on. The right to green is, of course, a very, let's say, first glance echo of Henri Lefebvre's The Right to the City, published in 1968. And Le Droit à la Ville, the Right to the City, was then taken up by the World Urban Forum in 2004 and more transferred to a human rights discourse. And so we could ask ourselves, if there is a right to the city, and the city is no longer just urban but also rural, as I introduced with this image in the very first slide, so we could say that the right to green is not outside the right to the city, but maybe complexly connected to it. And I already pointed that out before, that the politics of self-organization very often lead to a legal form that tries to ensure that urban gardens or urban farms can exist longer than today and can be there in the future. So I was very interested in the form of organization. I'm not an urban gardener today, so this is what I probably should also say. I grew up like this, so I grew up in a village where my mother made sure that I learned all these urban garden things. So how to do the beans, that they do the right thing, and the tomatoes and this and that. But I do not do that as a practitioner today. And I think it's also very important to understand this difference, that gardening is a very embodied, very physical practice, and one that needs a lot of labor, a lot of time. So this is something that we should never forget when we speak about this in these more, let's say, urban research terms. But today I'm looking at this as a researcher and curator, and not so much from the perspective of doing and growing plants, but I'm interested in its politics and the politics of self-organization. So historically, what you're looking at are three cities that are probably cannot be, I hope you can see that. So this is probably not the urban image one has in mind when thinking of Berlin or Leipzig or Chicago. All of these cities were marked by enormous growth in the second half of the 19th century, and by population increase, that people moved from rural areas to Berlin and Leipzig, and a lot of settler colonial immigration in the case of Chicago, that was the most multi-ethnic city globally in the late 19th century. So what we see here in the first slide in Berlin are people who are still farmers but work as proletarians in factories in Berlin. And since there was no affordable housing for them, they took to building their own housing and subsistence gardening. And I think looking at this, this is also what we could call a global image. I mean, many cities around the globe today look like this. The kind of legal contract that they could make with the people who owned the property was always only for 1 year. So we could say keeping them in a precarious condition of having to renew the lease for the land after a year was very much a structural element. And they formed, as I said before, associations. In the part of the world where I come from, the name Schreber, the Schreber movement is very much associated with the urban garden movement. And this one, so the first one we see is a proletarian or workers' class movement. The Schreber garden movement was originally a bourgeois garden movement, and the bourgeois families in Leipzig wanted a place where working class children could play and grow flowers. So originally it wasn't individual lots, it was a square. And they negotiated with the city of Leipzig a piece of land for 100 years, so that it would be taken out of real estate speculation and would be there for the common good for 100 years. So then they had these individual flower beds for young people and children. And young people and children are not always fond of gardening. So it was the parents who took over. And this was actually how this formation of the individual lots next to each other that provide both the opportunity to grow subsistence, to make subsistence gardening, but also to grow flowers, as many people do today. And the last example I'm showing here is Hull House Settlement House program, which was initiated by the feminist researcher, organizer, and later Nobel Prize winner Jane Addams. And she did not initiate an urban garden, but she also initiated a collective playground. And she wrote a text in 1912 about something she called cosmopolitan patriotism. So that places like playgrounds where people who have different ethnic backgrounds can come together are actually important for the making of cities. And today, in many places around the world, their urban gardens or urban farms often also fulfill this kind of function of what is called intercultural gardens. And Hull House also served as a platform. So it was located in a district of Chicago that was very poor at the time, and a lot of struggles for housing, for just wages. And what they did, they moved. So again, it was representatives of the bourgeoisie, one could say, well-educated, mostly women, who moved to Hull House and then organized with the working class people there. And there's been a lot of criticism that, what it means that there is a class distinction. We can also discuss that later. But sometimes I think that this bias also prevents us from seeing that there were very interesting transversal models of exchange that crossed class and gender lines. I also wanted to make clear that in looking at the correlation between crisis and gardening, we always have to look at war. So today we would look, there are wonderful books being written today about subsistence gardening in Lebanon or in crisis areas. So I looked at war in a more historical context, where the garden economy was very much integrated into the logic of war. You could say it was the domestic front. And of course it was mostly women's unpaid labor that kept these war gardens going. I also think it's important to understand that it's not a romantic, the gardens we speak about here are not romantic gardens, or are not to be romanticized or glorified gardens, but they are very much gardens that come out of contested territories and crisis management, if one will. So the time of the poster is the time, roughly the time when these gardens in the city where I live in Vienna were turned into so-called war gardens. And again, the gardeners there, who called themselves future gardeners, formed an association. And today they are allotment gardens. They still exist. They negotiated a lease from 1919 to 2043. So what kind of leases there are negotiated with regard to the land the gardens are on is something I find extremely interesting to do research on. How is the land taken out either of speculation, or how are these, how is the land leased or granted by local authorities? This is an image most of you might be familiar with. So I'm doing a long, I'm jumping over many decades. So we were looking at World War I, and now I'm kind of moving towards the second half of the 20th century to a place in time, and I want to say that again, a place in time. So if we are looking at New York today, it's not the city we are looking at in this image. Today we would probably speak about Detroit or Baltimore with regard to crime scenes, deprivation, joblessness, etc., etc. I think it's important to remember that New York in the mid-1970s was very much a city on the collapse. You all know the campaign, I Love New York. Meanwhile, we love everything. I mean, we love all the cities around the globe. Our affection is needed. But I Love New York was a marketing campaign invented so that people would actually think of New York as a good place. And this wasn't so easy in the mid-1970s. And it was this time when activist gardeners, mostly from the immigrant Puerto Rican community, joined forces to form the Green Guerrillas. And so there is something also troubling about the militant language that links the gardens back to these kind of war gardens, or to the urban war, if one will. The peaceful garden and at war. So this is something also very troubling. And the first community garden that was built overnight. So this is another thing that urban historiography teaches us. There's a kind of narrative that comes with these urban gardens. Overnight, people come, clear the land that is not used for gardening before, and try to begin planting. So I think this is a narrative we find again and again. The conquering of the land on one hand, but also the physical labor necessary to make the land useful. And the Bowery Houston Community Farm and Garden was founded by a group around this woman we see here in the photograph, Liz Christie. She was a local artist, and it's important to keep in mind that it was both a farm and a garden, so that there were really things grown to be eaten. It's also very interesting to keep in mind that Puerto Rico was one of the countries in the world that had official policy of integrating self-help building into urbanization processes. So the Puerto Rican immigrants who had come to New York brought with them a specific knowledge, but also a specific idea of how to take the making of cities into one's own hands. Liz Christie has already died, so that's why the garden in commemoration of her was renamed Liz Christie Garden in 1985, and it still exists. It's one of the gardens that has survived many different New York mayors. An example where the research would now have to continue. So at the time of research, Cuba was a very different system than it is today. So we will see how this will develop now. As you all remember, with the dissolution of the USSR, Cuba lost one of its most important trading partners. So there was no more pesticides delivered to Cuba from Russia, and also the sugar, like the monocultural product that Cuba produced, was no longer, so there was this back and forth between pesticides and sugar was interrupted with the end of the USSR. And also 1991 was a point in time when the embargo from the US embargo was heightened, and there was a shortage of oil, which you of course need for agricultural, technological, industrialized agriculture. So the very famous urban community gardens, the organopónicos populares, they started bottom up, so that people actually started to grow vegetables on their own initiative, but they were transformed into the most large-scale government organized urban gardening system worldwide. And a lot of researchers, activists, scholars have studied Cuba as this kind of model, that this is, and it's another image of what the urban might look like in the future, so that this is also what we consider urban today. When we look out of these housing, 1960s housing, and in front now there are urban fields, or there is agriculture, urban agriculture. And I think it will be very interesting to see how this now will change or stay, yeah. And the last part of what I'm sharing with you today is, in more detail, is the story behind the image with which I started the talk today. Mapopo Community Farm in Mashipo Village in the New Territories in Hong Kong. The people whom we see here are two of the major protagonists of the resistance of Mashipo Village, Mapopo Farm, against four developers that want to build there. But also there is a larger governmental policy move that mainland China actually wants to move all the urban agriculture from Hong Kong and the New Territories towards mainland China. So this is Becky Au. She studied economy in Hong Kong and used to work in Hong Kong Central for a long time, but she grew up in Mashipo Village, and this is her grandmother. And a couple of years ago, Becky Au moved back to her village to start organizing the farmers who are still there, but also to collaborate with people her generation in their early 30s, activists, artists, graphic designers, architects who have moved to the village to join forces with the resistance and also learned how to become urban farmers. So this is the house where Becky Au's grandmother and Becky Au are living. And it's one of these informal houses. I have to say a little bit about land rights and land use, and we go into colonial history and present-day urbanization and developer logics and how they come together. So Hong Kong, between 1897 and 1997, was a British Crown colony. And during the imperial system, when it was part of the British Empire, indigenous populations by the name of Punti were granted special land rights. So they could keep all their territory. And the land in the new territory is also the land of this village, was mostly Punti owned. And then after 1997, or shortly before 1997, when it was clear that Hong Kong would be returned to China, a lot of Punti emigrated to somewhere in the Commonwealth, to Canada or to the UK. So they are not living there on their land. And the people who are now living on the land and who are in the users, if you will, so they both use the land and they keep it productively, they don't have any land rights. So the developers, there are 4 developers, one amongst them is Henderson, a Canada-based, operating out of Canada. They give money to the people who own the land, to the Punti. But the ones who are driven out are the ones who are actually the local farmers, and they don't receive any recompensation, but they also lose their way of life. So it's a very complex story relating on one hand to colonial history and on the other hand to present day processes of developer-driven urbanism. And Becky Au she started the local concern group. There are many different new territories, so-called concern groups. They also form legally associations to organize the farmers to not give up. So this is the image in its context. This is what it looks like when the houses are torn down. And these are the strategies they use to raise awareness. So there's a lot of, you could say, educational programming, outreach, doing walks, producing exhibitions. So there's a lot of how to raise public awareness that if, so today 20% of the food needed in Hong Kong is still grown in Hong Kong. Which is not, 20% is not a whole lot, but it is something. And to lose that is something more than just a group of people who are farming. So these are the neo-farmers, if you will. So they are the people who joined the older farmers there. And Chi Ho is the person who I worked with when I was in Hong Kong. And when the exhibition took place in Vienna, I invited him also to Vienna so that there could be an exchange with local urban activists. And he was also very interested to use the entire research that we had done on Hong Kong for an exhibition in Hong Kong, to use exhibition making, if you will, as an activist educational tool. So he stayed in Vienna for like a week to exchange and to. So I'm saying this because I would like to emphasize that I see curating as something that becomes also involved in these knowledge transfers. So at the beginning, I described hands-on as something involving active participation, also in a more political sense. And here we see a group of people assembled. And the people on these chairs actually invited the local municipality to have a meeting with them. So it's not the local municipality inviting the gardeners, but it's the gardeners and farmers who want their politicians to speak for them and to become part of their, if you will, struggle. This is a very humble piece of architecture, but it serves as a common space. So as the space where workshops take place, next to it the produce is being sold from the urban farming, and it's also serves as a space for local political assemblies. And this is the last image that I will show today. So at the beginning I had something that I referred to as a chronopolitical image, one that shows that the rural and the urban might not be that kind of dichotomy that is inscribed into it both historically but also in terms of contested relations, economic and political and spatial. And the last image I would like to suggest is again a chronopolitical image. So this is Becky Au from the back, and she is a contemporary urban farmer. And at the moment we don't see her farming, but we see her at her computer. She's part of a worldwide network of people who work with permaculture, but also with a lot of other urban activists exchanging strategies of resistance, of political organizing. So I would just like to emphasize that this kind of working on urban gardening and urban farming that addresses larger processes of question of crisis, resistance and self-organization might also always be in need of the kinds of images that convey this story also in image-based terms that do not romanticize the green, but show green and farming as something that is a contemporary urban way of living. And with this I would like to conclude.
So we have like 50 minutes. Up to 50 minutes for questions.
I was just wondering something, this dynamics between the urban farmers and the local government in, for example, in the case of Hong Kong. Could you please elaborate on that? What is going on right now?
So right now I don't know. I would have to go back and do more research. From what I heard last from them, which was about a year ago, is that they managed to still be there. So what they are trying to ensure is their existence tomorrow, and they always actively so it's not they're so I think there is a big difference between squatting and between negotiating. The way they are negotiating. So they would not consider themselves as squatters, but they would consider themselves as people who have earned the right to the land via the use of the land. So I mean, this is to be debated, you know. I mean, I'm just referring to the self-narration, and that they want political support and not the local government or the authorities as their enemy. And that's why they try to invite them to organize roundtables, to organize a say in the representative politics.
We are so silent.
I find this the whole kind of parallel between urban gardening and war, and urban gardening and austerity measures, and urban gardening and precarization pretty interesting, which I guess it's something that I haven't come across before when it comes to like studying urban gardening, studying like horticulture or like urban practices that yeah, go to the more like ecological direction. So I was wondering, like, if you could perhaps elaborate a little bit more on that in terms of like, do you see that? I mean, as far as I understand, you don't see it as a cause and effect thing, but you suggest to us to see some sort of a relationship between the two, and it. I agree that it helps not to romanticize this whole thing. But it never came up, so I mean, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about like in that direction.
I think relation or relationship is a very good term. So I guess the argument I'm making is that in times of crisis or crises in plural, urban dwellers find ways to produce what is not there, or they find ways for making a subsistence that is outside of other types of economies, to rely on these kind of, you could say, self-help gardening in order to produce food, or in order to have access to something that you otherwise would not have. And I guess this is why I looked at it through this lens. So I looked at urban gardening during times of war, or during times of precarity or austerity. I think you could use a different lens. I mean, you could look at urban gardening from many other perspectives. In contemporary context, you could say there's a lot of greenwashing done with urban gardening. Or there is a model, for example, in Vancouver, there are developers who use urban gardeners as interim. So for 3 years, you get the land. So it's similar to how artists are being incorporated into urban development schemes. So I don't think that all kinds of urban gardening is the same. But I think one can construct a history of urban farming and urban gardening that shows that people are resilient, to use another very contested term, or have the capacity to provide for themselves. And sometimes they do this on land that is not theirs, but is then made legal afterwards. So there are often very complex processes of something that is illegal at the beginning, or extra legal, or outside of something, and that is then, by way of negotiation, forming associations, turned into something legal and is made part of urbanization. So I think that's the one strand I tried to look at.
Among the various examples you showed, I knew about Detroit because Detroit is in fact a city that is dying, where even parks are no longer taken care of because there are no municipal employees. It's a city that has gone bankrupt entirely. So it is understandable that some of these parks may be used for horticulture, for growing vegetables. Similarly, many of the gardens in abandoned homes I saw were being used by those who stayed behind in Detroit, who are totally unemployed, as gardens. Not gardens, but actually to raise vegetables to eat. Okay? So Detroit may be one case where you talked about in terms of poverty, in terms of prices, in terms of precariousness, which is certainly, there are simply no jobs in Detroit. Okay, in contrast to that, I am wondering about Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is a city where land is very valuable, direct contrast, where land per square meter is among the highest in the world. So it would be very difficult to preserve land for horticultural purposes because it's so valuable. Immediately it would be taken over for building purposes. This is so in Istanbul as well, of course. You know, land is continuously being used. Anything that's green, that's left over, is being used for construction purposes because it's become so valuable. So I'm wondering, you know, how in Hong Kong it's possible for horticulture to exist, for it to provide 20% of the food, fresh food, fruit, whatever, vegetables, in Hong Kong. Who owns the land itself? Does the municipality protect this land? So that would be perhaps more of a parallel one might find in the Istanbul case since Hong Kong, because Detroit is a very special case. I mean, it's just, the city has been abandoned, period. So.
I think what's so interesting about the contrast you are constructing is that urban agriculture seems to be second best. So it is allowed to happen as long as there is no better use, or it has to happen if there is no other thing happening, as in the case of Detroit, where so there is no jobs, there is no municipality. So all of a sudden, it's considered a solution to the problem. Not part of the problem, but something that can help make the city different. And I think what one could take from this is to understand that it also could be not second best, but the best thing that can happen for a piece of land in the urban context, also in very densely populated urban environments. I think I'm not sure I'm so clear now, but
in terms of ethics and sentiment, I agree with you. It's just that when a land becomes very high priced, meaning very valuable, then it is very difficult to compete with interests,
absolutely.
construction interests. So they take over. There was an example this morning
Yeah, from Istanbul.
from Istanbul, Yedikule Gardens, where the municipality decided to build on it because the land is valuable. They're going to construct condominiums, sell them, make a lot of profit, etc., etc. Now this is very difficult to stop unless there is municipal intervention. So I'm wondering in Hong Kong, how is this, who owns this land? Does the municipality protect it? Do the people who plant things own it? If so, how do they resist the high prices offered by developers? I'm sure the developers have come in to buy this land.
Yeah, there's pressure on it. I mean,
Yes.
there's a lot of pressure on it. As you were saying, there is economic interest on it because if you build housing or something that can be used as office space, it's more lucrative in developer terms.
In Hong Kong.
In
Yes.
Hong Kong, yeah, and so the land rights are complex. So as I said before, most of the land in the specific case is used by these Punti population people who moved away, and not by the people who are actually on the land now using it. So they are in a very precarious situation, because if the landowners sell the land to the developers, then it's gone. But what they are trying to do, or what they did, why they could hold on, is that they were able to convince some of the landowners not to sell yet. No, I mean, so as long as not all the land is sold, they will still be there. But
So it's private property.
it's private property. Yeah, in this case it's private property. But of course they also, so the other thing is the kind of use that is foreseen in the urban planning, no? I mean, you can, so now it is dedicated for agricultural use and for fishing. And I think this is, so I didn't answer your question fully. So this is why they also negotiate with the municipality, because at the moment the land is still land that you do not build on, but it's land for agrarian use. So this is where the municipality, if the municipality is strong, they could insist on this kind of land use. And that's why they have these, why they organize the meetings. So I think there is different strategies at the same time. So one is convince the private owners not to sell, but that's of course not so easy. The other one is how long will it be defined as agrarian use? That's what you call it, right? That's the technical term for that. So at the moment it's agrarian use and it borders a river, so fishing use. But as soon as the municipality changes the urban
Zoning.
plan, the zoning, yeah, that's the word I was searching, the zoning. So I think zoning has become a very political tool, and actually the neoliberalization of urban governments that let go of the right to zoning that they actually have, and have in mind the more short-term lucrative uses. I think this is an extremely complicated situation in places like the one we are in now, in Istanbul, in Hong Kong, in many accelerated growth cities.
And what is the legal form that this group has taken? You said many of them were
Yeah,
associations.
they're also an association. So they are.
Did they have any connection to the political movements in Hong Kong? I mean,
Some of the individuals did, but not, I don't think so I think this is again, not the farmers who are there, like the older people who are farmers, but a lot of the younger people who joined them did actually.
Mhm. It's called the umbrella movement.
The umbrella movement, yeah.
In Hong Kong.
I think there's another.
Yeah, well, I was what was I? I was
Moderator
of the
of the-
previous panel.
Huh.
So meaning that we were looking at within the framework of commons and commoning. So given that, I wonder that because you came up with many jargons, vocabularies, but different from commoning. You didn't refer to commons and commoning, at all. If I might have missed it. So this is what I would like to bring into and ask, because you are looking for such a long scope from 1950s till today, and yes, commoning has been a buzzword, especially here. I mean, check out what we are doing right now, and we really talk about it a lot and underline it, and you've been through many examples. So I was wondering that, were there any examples who put commoning or, because this is one of the prime questions of your talk, could horticulture or urban gardening could be a practice of commoning or a way of, learning, or is it, or we could ask that our urban gardens are commons. So there are various ways to approach it. So how would you envision that, looking through all those practices, even they refer to it directly as a concept, or not at all from your perspective?
Very complex question. So I think, no, that's great. I mean, historically the commons was always land that was used collectively, and there were many different activities with these commons. I mean, they could refer to wood or to mushrooms or to, so all kinds of things that you can use for your livelihood. So this is not what I looked at. I think a term that could be used for the practices that these gardeners do is the practice of commoning, of sharing knowledge, of sharing seeds, for example, of organizing seed exchanges against the industrialized, non-fertile seeds that Monsanto or others are pursuing. There are activities of commoning by way of transnational exchange between such gardens, but it wasn't a theoretical lens I used, so I'm not a common scholar. But I think that the word commoning, and I think Doina Petrescu, she is Paris-based architect, has used the garden more from the perspective of gardening. So this activity, so one might say that gardening is similar to the commoning, so the process of the making of the garden as a social and political activity. So I could probably say more about gardening than commoning, because this is not what I'm an expert on, but I think there are very close links to be made. I think it becomes a lot more complicated with regard to land rights and land use and the activation of this legal concept of the commons that was part of many territories in the world globally, we could say. So historically there were always commons, and they were safeguarded by law for poor populations very often. So the commons as something that also gave a means to subsistence, if I'm not mistaken. But maybe you can say more about that.
Well, because, for example, I'll try to, it's a difficult link to make, but I'll try to do it. As you said, that gardening is a practice of commoning. But when it becomes a commoning practice, for example, here in Turkey, especially after Gezi, there were like reclaiming lands, and like in urban guerrillas in New York, kind of overnight building, urban gardens. And then groups of people, hopefully, as long as they keep on, let's say build within neighborhoods, they were planting and harvesting, but keep on commoning practices. They kind of enforce themselves in a way when we look at from today. And then I really like the question that you have asked. When you were putting the exhibition at Vienna, the workers in the exhibition house has asked you, is planting is a kind of a job that we can do at our free times, lunch break, or is within our paid hours. So thinking that when commoning, which is kind of a volunteered job also, but it's also self-organization thing, where you have to put too much effort, how would you sustain the commoning practice itself unless it has become like other examples that you have shown? So maybe it starts as a gardening and commoning practices, but sustain it as a part of a commoning is kind of difficult. So again, I would like to refer back to your research, what you have seen. And me being the observant of those commoning gardens, for me the climax is not gardening and planting or growing, but usually harvesting. So what you do, the outcome, the final produce, how you share them, what you cook out of it, how you split it. So, because from the understanding of commoning is a continuous rebuilding, overbuilding kind of a process. Not a process, with the promises it gives, supposedly. So I wonder that, how they sustain, or do they sustain?
I mean, a lot of, I come to you because you also raised your hand. I think a lot of the examples I showed, like the ones in Cuba and also the ones in Hong Kong, they are part of a regular economy. I mean, so I would say they have a commoning practice in it, but they're also part of selling their things. So the question is, are they different then, or are they just the same? Yeah, so.
Yeah, I think this is the moment what we think about our existing structures, right?
Yeah, I think it can be interesting to look at the work of Gibson Graham, take back the economy and how to say it's not pitting one against the other, but how to bring that together, maybe.
Thank you for the lecture. My question is about how we can find, I don't know, like a more in-depth information about the exhibition. I just saw online that you have a book as well. Where should we look at to get a better understanding about your, examples, case studies? What would be the platform?
The book is
Buy the book.
I'll start with that. And then from that point on, I mean, the
yeah, but
exhibition.
we can also communicate via email or in person.
The book is available in both German and English, right?
No more questions? I think we can thank our valuable speakers and the audience as well for coming here today. And what else? The next, should we make an announcement?
Yeah, maybe
about
quick
the-
before
Yeah,
the
just
14th
a
of
quick
May.
one. Here's the schedule. Okay, the
Have it here.
the
Just
third event.
Huh?
The third event.
Right.
Üçüncü.
Okay. So we have we have things happening every other week, every other weekend. So the next time we'll have an event is the 14th of May.
May. Yeah.
It's going to be at South Galata, not here.
Another
And
event.
we will be there the whole day, basically.
Yeah.
It starts at 11. We have 3 panels going on, like the one we had today, but with different topics. So 1.5 panels, one after the other. The first one will be about affective labor, the second one is collective production, and the third one is
Urban property.
common property. And then we have, starting at 5, we have our next speaker, Emma Doling, speaking about affective labor again. So, I mean, feel free to come.
Yes, we would be happy to
Yeah.
see you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.